Into ethnic cleansing over the last year, a bishop helped save over 100 people from fighting and abduction.
Bishop Emmanuel Murye had only been ordained by the new Anglican bishop of Kajo Keji County a few days before fighting broke out there in January 2017. He sheltered dozens of families in his church compound until the fighting ceased.
Every week at Parolinya camp in northern Uganda, Bishop Emmanuel Murye's congregation, made up mostly of South Sudanese refugees, meet under a tree for Sunday service. They came at the start of 2017 from their homes in Kajo Keji, South Sudan, as the government and two rebel groups battled for control in a war sparked by a feud between President Salva Kiir and his former deputy, Riek Machar. Bishop Murye had been installed as the new Anglican bishop of Kajo Keji County just days before the fighting broke out. He sheltered dozens of families in his church compound until the fighting died down. Thousands of people fled to Uganda. Murye stayed and organized truck to carry over 100 people across the border. Kajo Keji became a ghost town. Almost everyone left, and Bishop Murye decided to follow his church.
A kind of taste of my faith and maybe of my leadership is when the people move out in big number, and I was left with no people, and it was terrible. All people moved out, and as a bishop, as new bishop also, I could not stay there. It is a great temptation, and I was asking God, why am I consecrated, called a leader at this time? And even the government, the army barracks, they expect us to be there. But the only thing we did actually was we could not stay there without people, because I was called to be leader of people, not a custodian of the soil or of the tree or of the houses, but I have to take care of the people.
The 4-year war in oil-rich South Sudan, a country only founded in 2011, has forced more than a third of its 12 million citizens to flee their homes. Tens of thousands have died, some in ethnic killings, others from starvation and disease. 65-year-old Koilunga Elujwai was picked up by rebel fighters and accused of spying for the government. He was taken to a camp where he says he was tortured and left for dead before being released. Now, due to his injuries, he is unable to do anything to support his family.
I was abducted and tied with chains. At the same time, they wanted to burn my navel and I resisted. I turned to my right like this, so they burned me with a hot machete and fire.
Evans Pierre was arrested by government forces from his home. The 47-year-old was locked in a container for 3 months, then released.
I wanted to thank the bishop sincerely for his ample time that he spent following up my case and following up other people's cases who are alive today. Without him, many of us would have died, or many of us would have been killed.
The UN Refugee Agency and the World Food Programme said there are millions of dollars short of funding to help refugees last year. Bishop Murye regularly crosses back into South Sudan, organizing church convoys that bring food and other aid across the border to displaced people hiding in Kajo Keji's forests.
All right, so the situation in South Sudan on our own continent, nothing short of horrific. For more on the story, we're now joined by our European correspondent, Jack Parrock, live from the Belgian capital, Brussels. Jack, what are authorities saying there?
Well, actually, we're discussing here in Belgium the trouble with the returning of African migrants, specifically from the Republic of Sudan, which a whole scandal has broken out here in Belgium and is likely to derail, in fact, the Belgian government. What happened was, back in September, there were 3 Sudanese officials that were invited to Belgium to basically screen a number of Sudanese migrants. There were around 100 or 150 50 of them in a detention centre in Brussels. And the Sudanese officials were allowed to screen these Sudanese migrants without an Arabic translator for their Belgian counterparts to be able to understand what was going on. And a number of them have been sent back. That's then resulted in a number of reports from some of the migrants through their lawyers that had applied for asylum in Belgium, here in Belgium, that since they've been sent back to Sudan, they have faced torture. This is now proving a massive headache for the Belgian government, and it's looking like it could, in fact, disband the coalition, perhaps.
Oh dear, this is serious, and this seems to involve more and more international bodies like the UN, individual countries who have refugees. Is there a sense of urgency, of fear because of possible ethnic cleansing?
Well, this is the thing. The Belgian government has been heavily criticised for this action in sending these Sudanese migrants back. Many NGOs have been extremely critical, but now what it's looking like is getting tricky for the Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel. The man who sent these people back and allowed these Sudanese officials to screen these asylum seekers is the Asylum and Migration Minister Theo Franken, who regularly celebrates blocking women with Muslim dress on from the borders and deporting them, etc. And essentially he's the one that was responsible for this Sudanese issue with these returns. And an investigation was set up since these allegations of torture, but the Prime Minister Charles Michel has sent essentially who's from a different political party, says that he understands that the delicate coalition that was set up in 2014 and named the Kamikaze Coalition after 138 days of talks here in Belgium, that if he understands that his government essentially will fall if he fires this aggressive asylum minister. So here in Belgium, everybody's waiting to see whether the government will fall over this major issue, over these returns of Sudanese migrants that have now accused the Sudanese government, the ones that were allowed in to screen them, of torturing them.
Sure. So this affects the political stability of Belgium itself, like you say, the Sudanese issue. Do we know how many migrants from South Sudan are in Belgium and in the rest of Europe? Surely everybody's trying to formulate policy right now.
Well, with Europe's migration crisis, as it's being called here, it's very difficult to get our hands on any specific numbers, and specifically the ones that have come through Belgium often try and make their way to France. A lot of people are trying to get into the United Kingdom, and that's where we're seeing the Calais camp on the border of the coast of northern France build up again. We're saying around 700 people are there. Many are Sudanese or South Sudanese as well, but it's difficult to know the exact numbers because of these kinds of issues, as you'll understand, because of these reports of people being sent back and screened by their own governments where they feel they're being tortured if they would be sent back, some of them political opposition, etc. A lot of these people are going to ground and not engaging with authorities, and that's simply making it more difficult here in Europe for the governments and the authorities to process the asylum requests. Obviously some people don't have valid asylum requests, but many from war-torn countries would ordinarily, but they're now fearing to go to the authorities.
Jack, just for our viewers, let's just quickly put this in context. So since 2013, they say nearly 2 million people have fled from South Sudan. This is after the president fired his deputy, sparking a conflict between two different tribes. And many would say this is bigger than Myanmar. It's bigger than a lot of refugee issues that have garnered global attention, but is getting much less attention. Do you think what's going on in Belgium right now at least will put the spotlight on South Sudan?
Well, if the government falls, it certainly will create a huge story and a huge wave, especially if it falls to this issue. But you're completely right. The South Sudan migration crisis and the people fleeing has been massively overlooked, I think, by international media, especially, I mean, obviously it's not to detract from the importance of the Rohingya crisis in Myanmar, or in fact, you know, the Syrian, the people fleeing Syria and the war zones there. I mean, if you're fleeing a war zone, you're simply escaping with your life. But I think that this could, perhaps if the Belgian government does fall, certainly shine more of a light on the Sudanese issue, which certainly hasn't perhaps been as remarked as in other places.
All right, thank you very much. So that was our correspondent in Brussels, Jack Parrock, in the Belgian capital, and quite incredible. He's saying that the Belgian politicians are fighting now. The government could fall over South Sudan, but a huge issue.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Belgium is quite a history.